4,000-year history, ancient Egypt was invaded many times. First came the Babylonians, then the Greeks and the Romans, until finally the land of the pharaohs collapsed and faded into legend, leaving only its magnificent temples and ruined cities to hint at its lost grandeur. The rediscovery of Egyptian civilization only began 2 centuries ago. Starting out as an exercise for gentlemen scholars, the science of Egyptology degenerated into institutionalized tomb robbery before re-emerging as the respected scientific discipline it is today. Ironically, the rediscovery of ancient Egypt, like its destruction, began with a military invasion. Join us as we follow the thieves and adventurers, scientists and explorers, as they embark on the quest for ancient Egypt. For centuries, outsiders whisper tales of the land of the pharaohs with wonder and amazement. Its geography and people are more legend than established fact, and its ancient past a mixture of rumor and myth. Reports of gigantic monuments and ruined temples fuel wild stories and fantastic tales of an ancient race of giants. When the mummified remains of Egyptian dead are first brought to Europe, they are ground into powder to be used in medicines because they are believed to have magical powers. Not until the 18th century is there any real attempt made to understand Egypt in the light of science and scholarship. And this interest is sparked by one of the most imposing figures in history, Napoleon Bonaparte. In the 1780s, Napoleon begins to nurture dreams of a world empire. He decides as a first step to invade and conquer the mysterious desert land of Egypt, gateway to the continent of Africa. On July 2nd, 1789, the French force arrives at the port of Alexandria. 38,000 soldiers disembark, resolved to conquer this ancient land for the glory of France and their emperor. Napoleon is determined to learn all he can about Egypt, and has taken the unusual step of including 167 artists, scholars, and historians in his invasion force. Among these learned men is Baron Dominique Vivant Denon. Denon has the background typical of a high-born French gentleman of his day. He has been a courtier under Louis XVI, is an accomplished artist, and has written an erotic novel to amuse his friends at court. But he's far from a scholar. In his own words, Denon says,
"I have never studied anything. It always bored me, but I like to observe a great deal."
Although not interested in military campaigns or Egypt, Denon is interested in adventure, and this seems like the biggest adventure since the French Revolution. Before moving his vast army into the Egyptian desert, Napoleon founds the Institute of Egypt to oversee the work of all his scholars. He meets with them, personally instructing them to learn everything they can about the ancient land that would soon be part of the French Empire. Denot is assigned to the section responsible for literature and the arts. But not keen to be part of a team, Denot decides to follow his own path. He wanders the streets of Cairo, pen in hand, entering houses, eager to record anything of interest. The result, a series of sketch portraits of Cairo's inhabitants. But Vivant is hungry for more.
I felt a great sense of well-being in Cairo, but this was never my reason for leaving Paris.
He needn't have worried. Within days, Denot finds himself accompanying the French army heading west out of Cairo, towards the ancient and awe-inspiring pyramids. There they come face to face with the army of Murad Bey, leader of the fierce Mameluke Turks and Pasha of all Egypt. Before meeting the enemy, Napoleon addresses his men from the foot of the Great Pyramids.
Reflect that from the top of these monuments, 40 centuries of history look down on us.
The Turks fight like wild men against the French invaders, but they're no match for European military technology and are soon driven into the desert, leaving thousands of bodies to soak the sand with their blood. Even while the battle rages around them, Denot and the other scholars stare in wonder at the towering image of the Sphinx rising above the smoke of the French cannon. Denot would later write,
Although its proportions are colossal, the outline is pure and graceful. The expression of the head is mild, gracious and tranquil. Its lips have a softness and delicacy that is truly admirable, as if they were of flesh and blood.
After the battle, the scholars begin to study the monuments on the Giza Plateau and realize their true magnificence.
I was walking on the soil of a land covered since time immemorial with a veil of mystery, closed for the past 2,000 years to all Europeans.
Denot and a select group of scholars are eventually attached to a division heading south in pursuit of the Turks, who have retreated into the desert. As they press into the vast sandy wastes, the Europeans are amazed at the number and sheer size of the ruins littering the seemingly endless desert. As they continue south, Denot strikes up a friendship with his commanding officer, General Doucet. Denot admires Doucet for his knowledge of literature and the arts. The general admires the artist for his unwavering courage. Despite the constant fighting, the scholars resolutely draw and record everything they see, including the horrors of 18th century warfare. Denot writes,
We are lashed by a constant volley of bullets. In the space of 10 minutes, 3 people with whom I was speaking were shot dead.
Once a bullet whizzes between his face and the drawing he's finishing. Looking up, Denot sees an Arab hurriedly reloading his musket. Grabbing his own gun, Denot shoots the Arab through the heart, calmly gathers up his portfolio, and returns to camp. When that evening General Doucet notes that the horizon line in the drawing is not straight, Denot replies,
Ah, that's the fault of the Arab. He fired too soon.
By January 1799, the army has arrived at the ancient capital of Thebes. Here Denot witnesses an extraordinary scene.
When we reached this city, a huge ghost from the dim and distant past, the army halted and spontaneously broke into wild applause. It was as if the occupation of this ancient capital marked the climax of their conquest of Egypt. At once, the soldiers proffered their knees so I could draw. Others clustered round to give me shade. The sun's bright rays illuminated the scene I so wished to convey to my readers. I wanted them to share the experience before the presence of such great things.
Unfortunately, military priorities take precedence over the work of the scholars. Denon spends only one day at Thebes, unable to linger among the monuments glimpsed so briefly.
I could have taken a whole month to savor what I had to absorb in just 12 hours.
A few days later, the army arrives in Esna. Here, the ancient Egyptians had built a temple in the very center of town. On entering the shrine, Denon finds to his horror that a number of the locals are using it as living quarters.
The inhabitants had obscured the temple with hideous tumble-down hovels and were abusing it in a most abject way. They should be cleared away. The portico is in a good state of preservation with a great variety of sculptures. It consists of 18 columns with bell-shaped capitals. I tried my best to draw the monument as vividly and as accurately as I could.
But the scholars are not just drawing the buildings. They're also dutifully copying in minute detail the incomprehensible hieroglyphs covering them. In the hope that some future generations might be able to unravel its cryptic secret, they have been recording this strange picture language for more than a year, without the slightest idea of how to decipher it. Awestruck at the miles of inscriptions carved and painted on the walls of every building, Denon writes,
"It would take months to read them, and years to copy them, even if one knew the language."
Adding to the mystery of the strange writings is the discovery of a basalt stone tablet in the ruins of Rosetta. While reinforcing a cannon emplacement, French artillerymen had discovered a huge slab of black stone buried beneath a wall. On one side are inscriptions in 3 different languages, only one of which, ancient Greek, is decipherable. Almost immediately, the scholars are asking, could this provide a clue to deciphering the strange picture language found on the ruined buildings scattered across the desert? After nearly a year on the march, the rigors of military life and the heat of the desert begin to tell on the team of scholars, particularly on the 50-year-old Denon, who's more accustomed to high society than high adventure. Exhausted, Denon takes time to draw a self-portrait.
I depicted myself with my clothes in tatters, the result of our continuous march, loss of baggage, and of the little time I spent attending to my own person. My drawings and journal preoccupy my entire time. I carry my portfolio everywhere, and at night it serves as my pillow.
Despite the wretched conditions and loss of supplies, Napoleon's army pushes doggedly onward. Egypt has by now been turned into a giant battlefield, with the situation of the invading French growing increasingly desperate. One day, to escape the blistering heat and horrors of combat, Denon seeks refuge in an ancient tomb. Here, to his wonder, he discovers an ancient papyrus text.
I did not know what to do with my treasure. I hardly dared touch this ancient book. I dared not entrust its safekeeping to anyone else.
Mesmerized by the scroll, its true importance slowly dawns on him.
It was the first time I saw images in the form of writing. The Egyptians must have had books.
By the time the French army reaches Aswan, near the southern edge of Egypt, many of the scientific team, including Denon, are unable to continue. Remaining behind at Elephantine Island, the team takes time to review their work, collate their notes, and recover their health.
This was the best time of my travels. I had 8 months of work to look at and was fortunate not to have anyone pressing me.
Denon turns Elephantine Island into his country home, a place for enjoyment and research. By boat, Denon visits the temples at Philae and investigates the mysterious cult of the goddess Isis. Despite his many memorable experiences in Egypt, it is here at Philae that Denon finds true contentment. In just over a year, Napoleon's commission to investigate the monuments of Egypt has accumulated thousands of notebooks filled with impressions, assumptions, and deductions. The artists have produced nearly 10,000 drawings, including more than 1,000 made by Denon. Eventually, Denon finds the strength to return to Cairo, where he personally delivers his work to Napoleon Bonaparte. Excited by the vast accumulation of work, Napoleon appoints 2 commissions to compile the research back in France. And even though the English drive the French out of Egypt within months, the work of the commission continues. The result is the first formal survey of ancient Egypt, the massive Description of Egypt. The publication of Denon's work and that of the Napoleonic expedition produces a feverish excitement throughout Europe. Egypt becomes fashionable, literally overnight. Baron Dominique Vivant-Denon is appointed Director General of the Musée Napoleon, later to be renamed the Louvre, where he works tirelessly to enlarge France's collection of Egyptian artifacts. Travelers come from France, England, Germany, and Switzerland to see for themselves the wonders revealed in these books. The accounts and drawings they bring back from their travels help maintain the momentum of Egypt's growing popularity. But the next step in unraveling Egypt's secrets doesn't come from a great adventurer or explorer. It comes from the brother of an employee at the company printing the massive Description of Egypt. Jacques-Joseph Champollion feels sure that his withdrawn bookish younger brother, Jean-François, will enjoy the curious hieroglyphic texts that pepper the illustrations. Jean-François Champollion is unquestionably a child prodigy. At the age when most boys are running and swimming, Champollion is devoting himself to the study of Middle Eastern languages. By the time he's 15, he's mastered a dozen languages, familiarized himself with the work of Denon and the Napoleonic expeditions, and informed everyone that he will personally decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics.
I wish to make a complete and thorough study of this ancient nation. My enthusiasm, inspired by the description of their glorious monuments, will grow only deeper. I must confess that of all the peoples dearest to my heart, none can equal the Egyptians.
In 1820, Champollion turns 19, and moves to Paris, where he'll spend the next 10 years studying every available scrap of information relating to Egypt, her monuments, and hieroglyphs. He scours the notes and diaries of veterans of the Napoleonic campaign and wanders endlessly through the halls and cellars of the Egyptian collection at the Louvre. Again and again he goes back to the strange black tablet known as the Rosetta Stone, with its tantalizing array of texts. At the top is a collection of the mysterious hieroglyphs. In the center is an undecipherable late-period Egyptian script now known as Demotic. And at the bottom, lines of Greek. Most scholars agreed that the stone held the same text repeated in 3 different languages, and therefore believed that it held the key to deciphering the hieroglyphs, and so opening up the lost world of ancient Egypt. As Champollion contemplates the stone, linguists from France, Italy, Germany, Sweden and England have for more than 20 years been engaged in a vicious competition to crack the code. Working alone with little to guide him, Champollion eventually realizes that some of the hieroglyphs represent single letters, while others represent entire words. This discovery, combined with his vast knowledge of Middle Eastern languages, gives him a critical advantage. After almost a year of puzzling over the hieroglyphs, Champollion manages to make them correspond to the Greek text. After a silence of almost 2,000 years, the ancient Egyptians have again found their voice, through the genius of a simple country boy with an incredible gift for languages. In September 1822, the 31-year-old Champollion delivers his findings to the French Academy. Champollion's discovery ignites a rage of academic discussion. Many scholars find it hard to accept the new findings. But Europe buzzes with talk of the brilliant young scholar who has broken the hieroglyphic code. To verify his work and silence his detractors, Champollion urges the Louvre to mount an expedition to Egypt. After years of painstaking research, Champollion will finally visit Egypt and test firsthand if his years of study and linguistic code-breaking will allow the stones of ancient Egypt to finally speak. Arrangements are made to attach a French team, led by Champollion, to an Italian expedition that is about to set sail for Egypt. The notorious Giovanni Belzoni leads the Italian team, a 6'7" giant with a reputation for acquiring any Egyptian artifact his clients can pay for. With past careers as a circus strongman, a monk, a dancer, and an engineer, Belzoni is now the world's most experienced hand at liberating Egyptian artifacts. In 1816, he had engineered the removal and transportation to England of a monumental oversized bust of Ramses II for the British consul to Egypt, Henry Salt. At the time, Belzoni wrote,
"I found it near the remains of its body and chair to which it had been once joined. Its face turned up to the sky, as if to say it liked the idea of being taken to England."
A skilled artist and tireless self-promoter, Belzoni turns out watercolor paintings and drawings to record each of his expeditions. Combined with a series of triumphal one-man shows, they've turned him into one of the best-known adventurers in the world. Like many early explorers, it is hard to tell the truth about Belzoni from the stories he invents to promote his image. Certainly his methods are as legendary as the man. He's opened more than one tomb using a battering ram. But even the great Belzoni has rivals scouring Egypt for treasure. Bernardino de Roveti has competed so fiercely with Belzoni that stories of their rivalry have made newspaper headlines all over Europe. To prevent an outright plunder war, the two have divided Egypt down the middle. Drovetti taking everything on the east of the Nile, while Belzoni claiming all excavation rights on the west. And Belzoni is the man who is to lead the scholarly Champollion into the heart of Egypt. He cannot be more different to the nervous, high-strung Champollion. He's a charming pirate with an earthy sense of humor that endears him to his rich patrons and peasant workers alike. By the time their ship reaches the port of Alexandria in August 1829, Champollion and Belzoni are already at each other's throats over who's in control of the expedition. To avoid a complete breakdown in relations, Belzoni suggests that the French and Italians separate and rejoin the following spring at Abu Simbel in the far south. The following day, Champollion leads his men ashore and writes in his diary,
I have arrived in this land of Egypt for which I have so long yearned. Tomorrow I shall step aboard my boat and take command. It's going to be fine.
As the French team strikes out across the desert, Champollion is mesmerized. Up until now, he's experienced Egypt's marvels only through book illustrations. Now it stands before him. At Karnak, he writes,
I saw the magnificence of the pharaohs, the greatest wonders man has ever imagined or achieved. No people, ancient or modern, has ever conceived an architecture on so sublime a scale.
It is at Karnak that the significance of Champollion's years of work finally hits home. He's the first man in 2,000 years to read the writings that adorn the temple walls. Scholars had begun a systematic study of the ancient monuments, but to Champollion alone, they spoke.
I could scarcely believe what I could read so fluently. This is my father. I am his son. He ordained that I should sit upon his throne when I was but a baby. He begat me in testimony of his love.
As the expedition continues into the depths of the Egyptian desert, Champollion's mood swings from elation to despair and back again. At the scattered ruins of the temple of Amenophis III, he becomes distraught and depressed as he walks among the wreckage, mumbling to himself about the irreplaceable loss of such a great monument.
There once existed 18 colossi, of which the smallest stood 20 feet high. All these monoliths had been broken, and we came across their enormous limbs scattered here and there.
But the magnificent Ramesseum, the great funerary temple of Ramses II, enraptures him.
The Ramesseum is perhaps the noblest and purest thing left at Thebes. One's imagination runs wild when one thinks they are the abode of the most famous princes in ancient Egypt's history.
For 30 years, European travelers have stared in wonder at the Ramesseum, with its paintings and reliefs depicting the gods bestowing their blessings on Ramses. But Champollion is the first to decipher their meaning.
I vouchsafe your edifice to be as durable as the sky. I grant you many days to govern Egypt. I give you domination over all other countries. I hand you the south and the north, the east and the west. I accord you a long life to govern the world. I wish your palace to live forever.
Overwhelmed by the experience and the importance of his own achievement, Champollion gradually feels that he's actually a part of Egypt and begins to go native. In a group portrait painted amid the ruins of Thebes, we find Champollion alone, dressed as an Egyptian.
I feel like a new man. My shaven head is covered by a turban. I am completely dressed like a Turk, with a huge moustache and long scimitar by my side. This costume is just the thing for Egypt. I can get by in Arabic, and am no longer taken for a beginner.
This is one thing Champollion has in common with Belzoni. The great showman had long ago adopted the local color. When the Italian expedition rejoins the French at Abu Simbel in May 1829, the two best-known Egyptologists in the world once again join forces. The sheer size and magnificence of the great temple at Abu Simbel forced even the most hardened academic to stare in breathless wonder. Champollion writes,
"The great temple alone was worth the entire journey."
Despite the danger of sand and rock slides, many of the group, including Belzoni and Champollion, begin the dangerous climb to the entrance of the temple.
We had to clear the entrance to keep free a small passage from the slide of the infernal sand which threatens to engulf everything. I would disrobe almost completely and lie flat on my stomach before a small opening of a door. It was like being at the mouth of an oven, and sliding down into the temple, I found myself in a temperature of 125 degrees.
In the sweltering darkness, the team continues its work.
Holding candles, Belzoni, Rossellini, Ricci and myself, and one of our Arab companions walked through this incredible edifice.
Hardly able to control themselves, the French and Italians run from room to room, from temple to temple.
The walls were engraved with large bas-reliefs depicting the conquests of the pharaoh in Africa.
Champollion sets to copying the hieroglyphs, deciphering everything, while Belzoni makes sketches that he will later turn into paintings. They work steadily, hardly eating, and drinking nothing but the water of the Nile. Under the increasing strain, Champollion's frail body begins to give out. More than once, other members of the expedition find him unconscious, his notes lying scattered on the ground. When the expedition arrives at Wadi Halfa, at the southernmost point of their journey, Champollion drafts a letter to the French Academy.
I am in a position to inform you that our alphabet is correct.
Finally, after months in the sweltering heat of Egypt, Belzoni and Champollion return home. While Belzoni receives a hero's welcome, Champollion is imprisoned under a quarantine order. Fearing that the plague might be present in the Near East, French authorities hold him in isolation for months. In the confines of the damp cell, his health continues to decline. In a letter to a friend, he writes,
"I've been treated like a victim of the plague, shut away in dirty and sad isolation."
Under these nearly impossible conditions, Champollion manages to complete his book on hieroglyphics and Egyptian grammar. Then on the 4th of March 1832, only 27 months after returning from Egypt, Jean-François Champollion dies at the age of 41. His book, The Sacred Principles of Egyptian Writing, joins Belzoni's recent publication on the bestseller lists all across Europe. Thanks to the work of a French linguist and an Italian tomb raider, interest in unraveling the mysteries of ancient Egypt is reaching a broader audience than ever before. Among those infected by the Egypt craze is William IV, King of Prussia. Anxious for the German people not to be left behind in the race for Egyptian treasure and glory, Wilhelm begins to look for a suitable candidate to become Prussia's first official Egyptologist. Among the hangers-on at Wilhelm's court is a 23-year-old university student named Karl Lepsius. Just weeks after Champollion's death, Lepsius had completed a thesis on the translation of some obscure Latin inscriptions. When his professors urge him to put his skills to work using Champollion's methods to translate hieroglyphics, Lepsius shows no interest. As a young gentleman, he plans to use his connections at the royal court to carve out a comfortable and glamorous life for himself. The hot, dusty tombs of Egypt hold no attraction for a young man with great expectations. How could he know that his king is looking for a court Egyptologist? Happily unaware of the opportunity awaiting him, Lepsius leaves on a leisurely tour of Paris, which inevitably leads him to the Egyptian collection of the Louvre and chance meetings with former associates of both Denon and Champollion. Poring over Champollion's manuscripts, Lepsius realizes that with Champollion's death, Egyptology has become a wide-open field, just waiting for a bright and charismatic leader. Lepsius's Parisian holiday turns into a 3-year tour of Europe. He consumes every available scrap of information on Egypt. He writes paper after paper on Egypt and the translation of hieroglyphics. Eventually his work comes to the attention of King Wilhelm. At last, here is someone worthy of leading a German expedition to Egypt. Wilhelm IV offers to supply all the money and provisions Lepsius needs, and to ensure that the expedition will not get bogged down in red tape once it reaches Egypt, the king writes a personal letter to the Pasha, sending several small but expensive gifts to ensure Egyptian cooperation. Lepsius outlines an ambitious goal for the expedition. Over the course of 3 years, he will travel up the Nile to the Sudan, studying every important site between Egypt and the Sinai. In true Prussian style, Lepsius proves to be a master of organization, and the Egyptians, thanks to the encouragement of their Pasha, offer every assistance. Dozens of Egyptian porters, guides, workmen and scholars rush to join the 9-man German expedition.
I have with me the illustrations from the description of Egypt. Thanks to them, we can follow virtually every stage of their journey.
As the expedition treks across Egypt and up the Nile, Lepsius is appalled at the theft of Egyptian treasure being carried out by museums and local tomb robbers. Many of the temples described in the Napoleonic chronicles have simply disappeared, torn apart and shipped to Europe, stone by stone. In the 4 decades since the French invasion, collectors, scholars, diplomats and explorers have been disassembling Egypt piece by piece. The popularity of Egypt has led to nothing short of the wholesale destruction of a culture. Anything that was not licensed for removal through diplomatic channels was simply smuggled out of the country on barges. The French may have begun the process during Napoleon's invasion, but the English and Italians had been doing their best to catch up. And thanks to men like Belzoni and his rival Drovetti, they were gaining ground. Lepsius is torn. His only aim is to study Egyptian culture. But he begins to realize that if Germany is to keep pace with the rest of Europe, he'll have to cart away as many trophies as possible. Surveying the area around the pyramids, Lepsius is puzzled at why previous expeditions have never systematically explored the Giza Plateau. He decides to begin his expedition here. Rather than remove treasures haphazardly, Lepsius spends months at Giza, mapping the location of tombs and recording every inscription in minute detail. Through dogged persistence, the German expedition produces the first truly scientific examination of Egyptian antiquities. The body of work is so extensive that Lepsius's reconstruction plans for the burial temple of Ramses II are still being used as blueprints by restoration teams today. In his diary, Lepsius keeps track of the expedition's progress.
Before leaving for the south of Egypt, we had examined 130 private tombs and discovered the remains of 67 pyramids.
Late in 1843, Lepsius crosses paths with French explorer and Egyptologist Émile Davenne. Like others before him, Davenne has adopted local dress, speech and manners. And although a trained engineer, he lives in a Bedouin tent and uses the name Idris Effendi. If Davenne's eccentric lifestyle is reminiscent of Champollion, his methods are more callous than either those of Belzoni or Drovetti. If they were thieves, Davenne's actions are wholesale plunder. At almost the same time, the German expedition and Davenne's band of pirates learn that the Egyptian government is planning to break up the Great Hall of Ancestors at the Temple of Karnak and use the stones in a new building project. As one of Egypt's most precious monuments, the hall contains inscriptions spanning 1,000 years of Egypt's pharaohs and royal families. And now it's up for grabs. Both sides race for the prize. Lepsius using every ounce of his political pull with the Egyptian government, while Davenne calls on his years of experience in outwitting local authorities. While Lepsius works his way through the tortuous channels of diplomacy and bureaucracy in Cairo, Davenne simply begins dismantling the Hall of Ancestors, using all his talent to hide the work. As he whiles away his days playing chess with the local police, his men haul down one block of stone after another and smuggle them by barge to Cairo. By the time Lepsius is granted permission to claim the Hall of Ancestors for Prussia, Davenne has finished his work. When Lepsius returns to Karnak to claim his prize, his boat passes Davenne's barge on the way north. Accepting an invitation to join Davenne for coffee, Lepsius doesn't realize that he's sitting on crates carrying the last stones from the Hall of Ancestors. the temple had simply vanished from Karnak, and legitimate archaeology had been duped by pirates. Undeterred, the Germans press on southward towards the Sudan and Ethiopia, looking for answers to a question that had become the driving force behind the expedition. Lepsius wonders, could the roots of pharaonic Egypt lie in some long-forgotten African civilization? Lepsius theorizes that if he can accurately date the temples of Nubia, he can prove an historical link between ancient Egypt and the rest of Africa. In time, the German expedition reaches the oasis at Wadi Halfa. No European expedition before them has dared venture further south. At Jeb Barak, they discover the ancient temple of Ammon. Previously only alluded to in legend, the temple contains a treasure of major importance. A monumental statue of a ram representing the god Ammon, protector of Pharaoh Amenophis II. Tragically, tomb raiders had stolen the horns and great golden disc traditionally associated with Ammon. But Lepsius is determined to claim his prize for Germany, using the same grueling methods that Belzoni and Drovetti used before him. After it was finally transported to Europe, Lepsius had the lost horns and disc restored. Finally, after months of trekking across the burning Sahara, the expedition reaches the ancient Nubian capital of Meru, where they discover no less than 184 burial pyramids. But even this far south, the monuments of the ancients have been despoiled. But here, it is not Europeans, but local tribesmen doing the damage. 12 years earlier, in 1834, one of the pyramids had yielded up the jewels of Queen Amani-Shaketo, and local grave robbers had been systematically raiding the tombs ever since. Through careful negotiations, Lepsius is able to convince the local chief to put a stop to the destruction of the historic sites. In 1846, Lepsius makes his triumphal return to Prussia, the first German to enter the ranks of the great Egyptian explorers. The trophies from the expedition include nearly 300 crates containing 1,500 objects from Egypt, the Sudan, and Nubia. The haul even includes several intact funerary chambers with the original sarcophagi, complete with mummies. In his efforts to stop the despoilment of ancient Egypt, Lepsius has himself become one of its greatest plunderers. To their credit, however, the German expedition has also produced an incomparable collection of archaeological information and data. Dozens of crates of meticulous research, thousands of engravings and plaster castings of temple carvings, and over 900 full-color illustrations. Using this mountain of research, Lepsius compiles a monumental work entitled The Denkmale, considered the most important reference on Egyptology to this day. With the publication of the Denkmale, Germany becomes officially a contending force in the field of Egyptology. 1850, Lepsius is appointed head of the new Egyptian Museum in Berlin, stocked largely with the booty from his own expedition. While King Wilhelm and all his subjects are proud of Lepsius's accomplishments in Egypt, Egyptologists in the rest of Europe are accusing the Germans of wholesale plunder. In fact, the vast majority of the criticism comes from the French, English and Italians, who simply resent the German competition in the great Egyptian treasure hunt. But the battle has been joined, and there's no stopping it. Through the next century, controversy will rage over how best to preserve Egypt's ancient treasures and cultural heritage. Should it be carted away to European museums, or left scattered across the Egyptian desert at the mercy of the elements and bands of art thieves? Undoubtedly, without the early work of Denon, Champollion, Belzoni and Lepsius, the study of Egypt might never have advanced as far as it did. Does this justify the wholesale rape of a national culture? Today the answer seems clear. The vast majority of Egypt's heritage belongs in its native country, where it can be studied and preserved in its natural surroundings. But before the debate is settled, 3 generations of Egyptologists would wrestle with the question of who had the moral and legal right to possess the incomparable treasure of the pharaohs.